Looking back at those early days, young Maya could still picture her childhood bedroom perfectly. The small space was always filled with rescued medical textbooks. Thick, worn volumes she'd saved from being thrown out at the local library. Some had coffee stains, others had dog-eared pages, but to her, they were more precious than gold. The walls of her room weren't covered with pop stars or movie posters like her friends. Instead, she'd pinned up detailed diagrams of the human body and hand-drawn charts of medical procedures. Growing up in Detroit during the 1980s wasn't easy. The neighborhood had its rough patches, but inside their modest two-bedroom apartment, Maya's mother created a sanctuary of dreams and determination. Every night, after working grueling double shifts as a hospital orderly, her mother would come home with stories that made Maya's eyes light up. She'd tell her about the amazing surgeons who could fix broken bodies, about nurses who knew exactly what patients needed before they asked, and about the miracle of helping someone heal. Maya would sit cross-legged on her bed, hanging onto every word as her mother described the busy hospital corridors, the beeping machines, and the dedicated medical staff who worked tirelessly to save lives. While her mother talked, she would massage her tired feet, and Maya would imagine herself wearing a white coat, walking those same halls with purpose. At school, while other 14-year-olds chatted about the latest music videos or complained about homework, Maya was different. During lunch breaks, she could be found in the library, nose buried in biology books. Her teachers noticed her unusual focus. Some encouraged her interest, slipping her extra science magazines or telling her about medical documentaries she might enjoy. Others raised their eyebrows when she mentioned wanting to become a surgeon, their doubt visible but unspoken. Her best friend Lily thought she was crazy. Who wants to spend their weekends studying instead of going to the mall? She'd ask. But Maya had seen too many people in her community struggle to get proper medical care. She'd witnessed how different the treatment could be depending on what you looked like or where you came from. These experiences lit a fire in her that no amount of teen peer pressure could extinguish. Every month, Maya and her mother would sit at their small kitchen table, surrounded by newspaper clippings about medical breakthroughs and scholarship opportunities. They'd make lists of pre-med programs, calculate costs, and dream big dreams over cups of hot chocolate. Her mother would always say, "Baby, the world might not be ready for you, but you better be ready for it." Those evenings became their ritual. Maya would share what she'd learned from her salvaged medical books, and her mother would add real-world wisdom from her hospital experiences. Together, they built not just a dream, but a battle plan. Maya started volunteering at the local health clinic on weekends, learning basic medical terminology and watching how doctors interacted with patients. The other volunteers, mostly retired nurses, took her under their wing. They taught her how to take blood pressure readings, explained the importance of bedside manner, and shared stories from their decades of experience. More than the technical skills, they showed her what it meant to care for people with compassion and dignity. Even then, Maya understood that her path wouldn't be easy. She saw how few doctors looked like her, how some patients would do a double take when they saw a black female doctor, and how subtle prejudices could shape everyday interactions. But in her heart, she knew this was her calling. Each challenge she observed only strengthened her resolve to succeed, not just for herself, but for every little girl who dared to dream beyond the boundaries others set for them. Maya's first real taste of what lay ahead came during her pre-med years at Michigan State University. The campus was beautiful in fall, with trees turning golden and red, but she couldn't fully enjoy it. Between her heavy course load and working part-time at the campus medical center, every minute was precious. Still, she managed to maintain a near-perfect GPA, studying late into the night while her roommates' soft snores filled their tiny dorm room. One crisp October morning, she walked into her academic advisor's office, clutching her course planning folder. The meeting started normally enough, but then took an unexpected turn. Despite her outstanding grades and clear passion for medicine, Her advisor leaned back in his chair and said something that would stick with her forever. Have you considered a less demanding career path? Perhaps nursing or medical administration? The words hit her like a bucket of cold water. Maya sat there, her folder growing damp under her sweating palms, as she processed what she just heard. The advisor's face held what he probably thought was a kind expression, but his eyes wouldn't meet hers. The silence in the room grew thick and uncomfortable. That evening, fighting back tears in her dorm room, Maya called her mother. The foam cord stretched across her bed as she curled up against the wall, voice shaking as she described what happened. Her mother listened quietly, then spoke with the wisdom that came from years of facing similar situations. Baby, some people will always try to dim your light. Shine anyway. You've got fire in your bones and healing in your hands. Don't let anyone tell you different. Those words became Maya's armor. The next day, she walked into the biology lab with her head held high, even as she noticed how she was often the only black student in her advanced science classes. When study groups formed, she frequently found herself working alone until a few international students began to join her. Together, they created their own support system, sharing notes, quizzing each other, and celebrating each small victory. Word spread about her study group's success, and soon other students started asking to join. Maya welcomed them all, remembering how it felt to be excluded. As their test scores consistently topped the class, even the skeptics couldn't deny her abilities. One professor, Dr. Chen, took notice of her leadership and offered her a position as his research assistant. But not everything changed. During lab practicals, she noticed how her work was scrutinized more closely than others. Simple mistakes that her classmates made were treated as learning opportunities, while hers were met with raised eyebrows and extra questions about her preparation. Each time this happened, she'd take a deep breath and remember her mother's words. The breaking point came during a crucial molecular biology presentation. Maya had spent weeks preparing, double-checking every detail. As she confidently delivered her findings, a student in the back row loudly whispered, "Probably only got in because of affirmative action." The room grew quiet. Maya paused for just a moment, her heart pounding, then continued speaking, her voice growing stronger with each word. Her presentation received the highest grade in the class. That night, she started a journal, documenting every incident, every subtle slight, every moment of doubt she faced. But alongside these challenges, she also recorded her victories. The perfect test scores, the glowing recommendations, the patients at her part-time job who specifically requested her care. These pages became her testimony, proof that excellence couldn't be denied. As graduation approached, Maya's reputation preceded her. The same advisor who had suggested she choose an easier path now proudly shared her medical school acceptance letters with other students. But Maya hadn't forgotten. She chose to use her experience to help others, quietly mentoring younger students who faced similar barriers. "Your presence here matters," she would tell them, passing on her mother's wisdom in her own way. Walking through the grand halls of Johns Hopkins Medical School, Maya often felt like she was living in two different worlds. The pristine corridors, with their polished floors and walls lined with portraits of distinguished doctors, seemed a far cry from her humble Detroit beginnings. In her class of 120 aspiring doctors, she was one of only 3 black students. The weight of being different wasn't just in her mind. It was in the curious glances, the subtle shifts when she entered a room, and the way some professors seemed to expect her to speak for her entire race. The workload was intense, leaving little time for self-doubt. Maya's days started before sunrise, poring over medical textbooks that were no longer salvaged from libraries, but purchased at steep prices that made her wince. Her nights ended long after most people had gone to bed, practicing sutures on oranges until her fingers could tie perfect knots, even in dim light. During clinical rotations, patterns began to emerge that couldn't be ignored. While other students received a mix of cases, Maya noticed she was consistently assigned the most challenging ones. At first, she took it as a compliment, proof that her supervisors recognized her capabilities. But then she started keeping track. One week, while her peers handled routine appendectomies and straightforward diagnoses, she was given 3 complex cases back to back. The scrutiny was relentless. Every decision she made, every note she wrote, every procedure she assisted with was examined under a microscope. Simple mistakes that her classmates made were often overlooked, but if Maya so much as hesitated while answering a question during rounds, it was noted in her evaluation. One morning, during a particularly grueling shift in the emergency department, she overheard 2 fellow students talking in the break room. "Did you see her patient satisfaction scores?" One whispered. "They must be inflated. There's no way she's naturally that good with patients." Maya's hand froze on the doorknob, her coffee growing cold in her other hand. The truth was, she spent extra time with each patient, knowing she had to work twice as hard to earn half the recognition. But there were bright spots too. The patients who specifically requested her care after seeing how thoroughly she explained their conditions. The nurses who would slip her coffee during long shifts, whispering, "Keep going, honey," as they passed by. And most surprisingly, the small group of fellow students, a mix of different backgrounds and races, who began to gather in the library with her, drawn by her clear explanations and patient teaching style. Late one night, as Maya was leaving the hospital after a 16-hour shift, she ran into Dr. Powell, an older black physician who'd been working at Hopkins for decades. He stopped her, looking tired but determined. "I've been watching you," he said quietly. "You're carrying a heavy load, but you're carrying it well." He shared stories of his own journey, of barriers faced and overcome, of small victories that added up to significant change. Before leaving, he slipped her his card, saying simply, "My door is always open." That conversation became a turning point. Maya began to see her struggles not just as personal challenges, but as part of a larger story. She started a study group specifically for minority medical students, creating a safe space where they could share experiences and support each other. When a younger student confided about feeling overwhelmed by the constant pressure to prove herself, Maya shared her mother's wisdom about shining anyway. The real test came during final evaluations. Despite her outstanding performance metrics and glowing patient reviews, one supervisor wrote that she seemed less confident in complex procedures. Maya knew this wasn't true. Her hands were steady, her knowledge solid. Instead of accepting this assessment silently, she gathered her detailed case logs, patient feedback, and procedure recordings. With Dr. Powell's guidance, she respectfully challenged the evaluation, presenting clear evidence of her competence. This wasn't just about her anymore. Every time Maya spoke up, answered correctly, or performed a procedure perfectly, she was opening doors for those who would come after her. The pressure was enormous, but so was her determination. As she told her study group one evening, "We're not just learning medicine, we're changing what a doctor looks like." The 3rd year of residency was supposed to be Maya's moment to shine. She'd earned her place in the neurosurgery program, her hands had become steady as steel, and her surgical outcomes spoke for themselves. But on a cold Tuesday morning, everything nearly fell apart. The operating room was tense that day. Maya stood ready for a complex brain tumor removal, instruments arranged perfectly, her mind focused and clear. The lead surgeon, Dr. Thompson, had always been tough on residents, but today seemed different. As Maya began the initial approach, his criticism cut through the sterile air. "Your hands are shaking," he announced to the entire surgical team. Maya knew they weren't. She'd performed this approach dozens of times before. But she stayed silent, focusing on the delicate tissue before her. Then came another jab. "Perhaps your hands aren't steady enough for such delicate procedures." The room grew uncomfortably quiet, save for the steady beep of monitoring equipment. The scrub nurses exchanged glances. They'd seen Maya's work before, knew her capabilities. One of them, a veteran nurse with 30 years of experience, deliberately placed the next instrument in Maya's hand with a gentle squeeze of encouragement. But the damage was done. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Maya completed the procedure flawlessly, as she always did. Her surgical notes would show perfect technique, minimal blood loss, optimal outcomes. But after everyone left, she found herself alone in the hospital stairwell, white coat pressed against the cold concrete wall, finally letting the tears fall. She thought about her journey, the late nights studying, the extra hours practicing, the constant need to prove herself. Her phone felt heavy in her pocket, her mother's number ready to dial. But this time, something different stirred inside her. This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. This was about a system that needed to change. Opening her phone, she began scrolling through her case records. Her surgical outcomes ranked among the top in her class. Patient satisfaction scores were consistently excellent. She had even pioneered some improvements to standard procedures that were being adopted by other residents. The evidence of her competence was overwhelming. That night, instead of going home, Maya walked to the hospital's small chapel. It wasn't about religion. She just needed a quiet place to think. As she sat in the dim light, her mind wandered to all the other talented doctors who might have given up when faced with similar moments. How many brilliant minds had the medical field lost because someone told them they weren't good enough? The next morning, Maya did something unprecedented. She requested a meeting with the residency director. Her hands might not have shaken during surgery, but they trembled slightly as she laid out her documentation. Every case record, every patient review, every statistical comparison of her performance against department standards. She wasn't just defending herself. She was challenging a culture. The residency director, a woman who had broken a few barriers herself, listened intently. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, it was clear that Maya's experience wasn't unique, but her response to it was. Instead of quitting or simply enduring, she was standing up, not just for herself, but for every resident who would come after her. That evening, Maya found an unexpected ally. A senior surgeon from another department, who had heard about the morning's meeting, stopped her in the corridor. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been watching your work for months. We need more surgeons like you, not just skilled with a scalpel, but brave enough to speak up when things aren't right." As Maya drove home that night, streetlights blurring through her tired eyes, she realized this moment wasn't breaking her. It was forging her into something stronger. She'd faced a choice between giving up and standing up, and she'd chosen to stand. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but now she had proof. Her hands weren't just steady enough for surgery. They were strong enough to help build a better future for medicine. Instead of letting that difficult moment break her spirit, Maya chose to transform it into something powerful. She started small, pulling out her laptop one evening in the doctor's lounge. As she sipped coffee that had gone cold hours ago, she began documenting every instance of discrimination she'd witnessed or experienced. Each entry told a story, not just of barriers, but of resilience. Her phone buzzed constantly now, not with complaints, but with messages from other doctors who had heard about her standing up to Dr. Thompson. A resident from cardiology shared how she'd been told her cultural background might make patients uncomfortable. An orthopedic fellow described being passed over for complex cases despite excellent performance records. Each story echoed her own experience, but together they painted a picture of a system that needed to change. One rainy Tuesday evening, Maya hosted a small gathering in her apartment. What started as a casual dinner with 5 other minority medical professionals turned into something much more meaningful. They sat around her small dining table, sharing stories over takeout containers and half-empty water glasses. The conversation flowed naturally from personal experiences to practical solutions. "Remember how lost we felt in the first year?" one colleague said, pushing aside her empty plate. "What if we created the support system we wish we'd had?" The energy in the room shifted. Suddenly, everyone was pulling out notebooks, jotting down ideas. Maya's coffee table disappeared under a sea of paper covered with plans and possibilities. They called themselves the Rising Tide Network because, as Maya's mother always said, a rising tide lifts all boats. They started meeting regularly, sharing strategies for handling difficult situations, offering support when someone faced a setback, and celebrating each other's victories, no matter how small. Maya began keeping detailed records of every teaching moment, every successful procedure, every positive patient outcome. When a younger resident faced unfair criticism, she could now point to concrete evidence of their capabilities. She taught them how to document their experiences, both good and bad, creating a paper trail that couldn't be ignored. The network grew organically. A senior nurse who had witnessed countless instances of bias offered to help. An administrator who had fought similar battles in her own career provided guidance on navigating hospital politics. Even some white colleagues, once they understood the challenges, became strong allies. One morning, Maya arrived at the hospital to find a young medical student waiting by the elevator. "I heard about what you're doing," the student said quietly. "I almost quit last week, but then someone told me about your network." Maya remembered standing in that same spot years ago, feeling just as uncertain. She pulled out her phone and added another number to the growing list of people supporting each other. The changes were subtle at first. More diversity in case assignments. More inclusive language in department meetings. More mentorship opportunities for minority residents. Maya and her colleagues had created a template for addressing discrimination, not through confrontation, but through documentation, collaboration, and consistent excellence. They developed strategies for supporting each other in real time. If someone faced a difficult situation, they had a system in place, someone to talk to, someone to witness, someone to advise. They shared their successful approaches with other departments, other hospitals, watching their influence spread like ripples in a pond. Late one night, as Maya updated their growing database of resources and success stories, she got an unexpected email. It was from Dr. Thompson, the same surgeon who had questioned her abilities. "I've been watching the changes you've initiated," he wrote. "They're making us all better doctors. I was wrong about you, and I'm learning from my mistakes." Maya sat back in her chair, letting the words sink in. The small plant on her desk, a gift from her mother, had grown new leaves. Like that plant, change was possible with the right care and attention. She opened a new document and began writing guidelines for other hospitals wanting to create similar support networks. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about creating lasting change, one story, one person, one department at a time. As the seasons changed, so did Maya's reputation in the hospital. Her surgical skills had become impossible to ignore. She spent countless hours perfecting a new technique for minimally invasive brain surgery, working late into the night in the surgical skills lab. The cleaning staff grew used to finding her there, practicing each movement until it was perfect. One morning, she presented her innovative approach at the department meeting. The room was packed, not just with neurosurgeons, but with doctors from other departments who had heard about her work. As she explained her technique, showing detailed slides of how it reduced recovery time and improved outcomes, she noticed Dr. Thompson sitting in the front row, taking careful notes. The questions came rapid fire after her presentation. Maya answered each one with confidence, backed by months of research and practice. When she finished, the applause wasn't polite. It was genuine. Even the most skeptical senior surgeons couldn't deny the data. Her technique cut surgery time by 30% and reduced patient recovery time by half. Word spread quickly through the medical community. Soon, other hospitals were requesting her input on difficult cases. The same journals that had once rejected her papers were now eagerly publishing her research. But Maya never forgot the feeling of being doubted, of having to prove herself over and over again. Then came a moment that showed just how much things had changed. Dr. Thompson, the surgeon who had once questioned her abilities, requested her assistance on a complex case. The patient had a tumor in a tricky location, and traditional approaches weren't suitable. "I've seen your technique," he said, his voice different now, respectful. "I believe it's exactly what this patient needs." The surgery was scheduled for early morning. As Maya walked into the operating room, she remembered all the times she'd stood in that same room, feeling like an outsider. Now she moved with quiet confidence, her presence commanding respect. The nurses knew her preferences without being told, and the residents watched eagerly, hoping to learn. During the procedure, Dr. Thompson followed her lead. She guided him through her technique, explaining each step with patience and clarity. When they finally stepped back from the operating table, hours later, the tumor was gone, and the patient's vital signs were stable. The entire team knew they had witnessed something special. In the scrub room afterward, Dr. Thompson turned to her. "I was wrong about you," he said simply, his hands still wet from washing. "Your innovation, your dedication. You've made all of us better surgeons." Maya nodded, accepting his words without bitterness. She had moved beyond needing approval. Her work spoke for itself. The residents who rotated through her service now came from diverse backgrounds, drawn by her reputation not just as a surgeon, but as a mentor. She made time for them, remembering her own journey. "Watch the patient, not the clock," she would tell them. "And never let anyone tell you what you can't do." During rounds, Maya would often quiz her team not just about medical knowledge, but about patient interaction. "How do you explain complex procedures to someone who's scared?" she would ask. "How do you earn trust?" Her lessons went beyond surgical technique to the heart of being a good doctor. One evening, as she finished updating her surgical logs, a young resident knocked on her office door. The girl's hands were shaking slightly as she asked about Maya's technique. Instead of just explaining, Maya took her to the skills lab, spending an extra hour showing her the precise movements. "Someone once doubted if my hands were steady enough," she shared. "Now I make sure no one has to feel that doubt again." Her office walls, once bare, now held certificates and awards, but Maya was most proud of the thank you notes from patients and the photos of residents she'd mentored. Each success story represented not just a personal victory, but a change in what was possible. She'd proven that excellence couldn't be denied, that innovation came from diverse perspectives, and that the best way to break barriers was to become so good they couldn't ignore you. With her reputation firmly established, Maya knew it was time to create bigger changes. She noticed how the faces in the hospital halls still didn't reflect the community they served. During her lunch breaks, she started sketching out plans for a comprehensive diversity initiative on the back of surgical scheduling forms. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "When you get through a door, prop it open for others." The hospital board meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. Maya had prepared meticulously, just as she did for surgery. Her presentation outlined clear problems and practical solutions. The data was compelling. Hospitals with diverse medical staff had better patient outcomes, increased trust from the community, and more innovative approaches to treatment. "We're losing brilliant minds," she explained to the board members, her voice steady and passionate. "Every time a talented student gives up because they don't see anyone like them succeeding, we all lose." She shared stories from her mentoring experiences, carefully protecting privacy while highlighting the systemic barriers many faced. The initiative she proposed was comprehensive. A mentorship program connecting experienced doctors with medical students from underrepresented backgrounds, financial support for promising students struggling with educational costs, and clear protocols for addressing discrimination in medical settings. She had thought of everything, down to the last detail. Some board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One elderly gentleman cleared his throat and began. These programs could be quite expensive. Maya was ready. She pulled out detailed cost analyses showing how similar programs at other hospitals had actually saved money by reducing turnover and improving patient satisfaction scores. The chief of surgery, who had watched Maya's journey from resident to respected surgeon, spoke up. Dr. Thompson told me something interesting last week, she said. He said his department's success rates improved significantly after implementing some of Dr. Maya's training methods. Perhaps we should consider the cost of not making these changes. To Maya's surprise, many department heads had already heard about her informal mentoring network. Residents were specifically requesting rotations at their hospital, drawn by stories of inclusive excellence. The momentum was building. After 2 hours of discussion, the board approved her proposal, allocating significant resources to make it happen. Within months, the changes were visible. The hospital hosted regular meetings where medical students could connect with mentors. Maya made sure these weren't just formal networking events. They included casual dinners where students could ask real questions and share their concerns. She remembered how much that kind of honest conversation had meant to her as a student. The program quickly became a model for other institutions. Maya found herself fielding calls from hospital administrators across the country, asking how to implement similar initiatives. She always emphasized the human element. It's not just about numbers, she would explain. It's about creating an environment where everyone can thrive. One Friday afternoon, Maya was reviewing applications for the mentorship program when a young custodian stopped by her office. "My daughter wants to be a doctor," she said shyly. "But people keep telling her it's too hard, too expensive." Maya smiled, remembering her own mother's hospital stories. She added another name to her growing list of mentees. The changes weren't always smooth. Some people resisted, claiming the programs showed favoritism. Maya met these challenges with the same steady patience she used in surgery. "Excellence knows no color," she would say. "We're just making sure everyone has a fair chance to prove themselves." In quiet moments, Maya would look out her office window at the hospital entrance, watching the steady stream of people coming and going. She saw more diverse faces among the medical staff now, each one representing a story of determination and hope. The hospital was becoming what she had always believed it could be, a place where healing happened not just in operating rooms, but in the very culture of medicine itself. 5 years into her practice, Maya's influence had grown far beyond the walls of her hospital. Her phone buzzed constantly with invitations to speak at medical schools across the country. Each time she stood at a podium, she saw faces in the audience that reminded her of herself years ago, hopeful, determined, and sometimes a little scared. During one memorable presentation at a prestigious medical school, a young student raised her hand. "How do you handle it when people assume you're not the doctor?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The room grew quiet. Maya stepped away from the podium, making direct eye contact with the student. "I remember being asked if I was the cleaning staff while wearing my white coat," Maya shared, her voice carrying through the packed auditorium. "But here's what I learned. Every time someone underestimates you, it's an opportunity to shatter their expectations." The students' shoulders straightened and heads nodded throughout the room. Back at her home hospital, the changes were becoming more visible each day. The newest class of residents was the most diverse in the hospital's history. Maya often caught glimpses of them in the cafeteria, huddled over medical texts, supporting each other just as her small study group had done years ago. One morning, while reviewing patient charts, Maya overheard 2 elderly patients talking in the waiting room. "Things sure are different now," one said to the other. "My granddaughter wants to be a doctor, and when I told her about Dr. Maya, she said, 'See, I can do it too.'" Maya pretended to be absorbed in her paperwork, but her heart swelled. The statistics spoke volumes. Under her leadership, the percentage of minority medical residents had tripled. But more importantly, their retention rate was nearly perfect. The support systems she'd put in place meant that talented doctors weren't just getting in the door. They were thriving and becoming leaders themselves. Other hospitals started sending their staff to learn from their program. Maya made sure these visiting doctors saw more than just numbers and protocols. She invited them to sit in on mentoring sessions, to witness the power of creating spaces where everyone could belong while maintaining the highest standards of medical excellence. During rounds one day, Maya noticed something that made her pause. A young resident was explaining a complex procedure to a patient, her confidence evident in every word. The patient, an older man who reminded Maya of some who had doubted her years ago, listened attentively and respectfully. Times were indeed changing. The ripple effects spread beyond medicine. Local schools started inviting Maya to career days, where she would share her journey with wide-eyed students. She always brought her old salvaged medical textbooks, telling them how she'd started just like them, with nothing but determination and a dream. One evening, after a long surgery, Maya found a note slipped under her office door. It was from a high school student who had attended one of her talks. "You made me believe it's possible," the note read. "I've started a science club at my school, and we're all supporting each other, just like you talked about." Maya pinned the note to her bulletin board, next to dozens of others like it. Her work began attracting national attention. Medical journals that once rejected her papers now asked her to write about creating inclusive excellence in healthcare. But Maya never lost sight of the personal impact. For every speech she gave at a national conference, she made time to sit with young students, answering their questions and calming their fears. The most rewarding moments were often the quietest ones. Like when she walked through the hospital halls and saw medical teams that looked like the world outside, diverse, capable, and working together seamlessly. Or when a young resident mastered a difficult procedure and looked up at her with the same joy she had felt years ago, proving that excellence knows no boundaries. Today, walking into the neurosurgery department she now heads, Maya often pauses to take it all in. Her office walls tell the story of her journey, not just through the numerous awards and certificates, but through the countless photos of doctors she's mentored. Each face in those photos represents a dream realized, a barrier broken, a life dedicated to healing others. This morning, she arrived early as usual, the familiar smell of coffee and antiseptic filling the hospital corridors. Her first stop was the residents' morning meeting, where the room buzzed with energy. The faces around the table represented every background imaginable. Proof that medicine was finally starting to look like the communities it served. "Remember," she told them, her voice carrying the weight of experience, "your presence here isn't just about you. It's about every patient who needs to see that healing comes from all kinds of hands." She shared her mother's words, "Shine anyway." The phrase had become something of a department motto, written on sticky notes and coffee mugs throughout the hospital. During her rounds, Maya stopped to chat with a patient's family. Their young daughter, maybe 7 years old, looked up at her with wide eyes. "I didn't know doctors could look like me," she whispered. Maya knelt down to the child's level, just as she had done countless times before. "We can be anything we work hard to become," she said, watching hope bloom in the little girl's eyes. Later that day, she met with her latest mentoring group. The program had grown beyond her wildest dreams, now connecting experienced doctors with promising students across the country. They discussed everything from surgical techniques to handling difficult conversations about race and gender in medicine. But most importantly, they shared stories of resilience and triumph. A knock on her office door interrupted her paperwork. It was Dr. Thompson, now retired but still involved in teaching. "Remember when I questioned your abilities?" he asked, settling into a chair. "Now I tell that story to every new batch of residents, as an example of how wrong we can be, and how much we can learn." Maya smiled, appreciating how far they both come. The afternoon brought a virtual meeting with hospital leaders nationwide who were implementing programs based on her model. "The key," she explained, "isn't just getting diverse candidates in the door. It's creating an environment where everyone can thrive." She shared practical strategies, but also emphasized the human element, the importance of genuine support and recognition. As evening approached, Maya took a moment to update her journal, a practice she'd maintained since her residency days. Next to records of successful surgeries and program milestones, she kept notes about the smaller victories. The shy resident who found their voice, the patient who trusted her with their care, the family who saw hope in her example. Looking out her office window at the setting sun, Maya reflected on her journey. The path hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother, still her biggest cheerleader. "Proud of you, baby," it read, followed by a heart emoji. Some things never changed. Before heading home, Maya stopped by the skills lab where a group of residents was practicing techniques she'd developed. Watching them work together, supporting and teaching each other, she saw the future of medicine. A future where excellence and diversity went hand in hand, where every talented dreamer had a chance to heal and serve. As she gathered her things to leave, Maya noticed a new photo added to her wall. This year's incoming class of residents, their faces bright with possibility. Among them was the daughter of that custodian who'd visited her office years ago. The cycle of inspiration and opportunity continued, proving that one person's courage to shine could light the way for countless others.